probably noticed the explosion of plant-based options at your grocery store. Vegan burgers, meatless nuggets, dairy-free cheese, all marketed as the healthier choice. But here's something that might surprise you. New research suggests that not all plant-based foods are created equal, and some may actually harm your heart. Today, we're breaking down what the science actually says about plant-based eating and why the way your food is processed matters more than the plant label on the package. What if I told you that a veggie burger could be worse for your heart than the food it's trying to replace? That sounds counterintuitive, right? A massive study tracking over 63,000 adults for nearly a decade found something that challenges everything we thought we knew about healthy eating. The participants who ate whole, minimally processed plant foods had significantly lower heart disease risk. But those eating ultra-processed plant foods, their risk actually went up. So let's talk about what makes a food ultra-processed, why it matters so much, and how to eat plant-forward in a way that genuinely protects your heart. First, let's understand what ultra-processed actually means. In 2010, researchers developed something called the ANOVA food classification system to categorize foods by their level of processing. ANOVA divides foods into 4 groups. Group 1 is unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Think fresh fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, and whole grains in their natural state. Group 2 includes processed culinary ingredients like olive oil, butter, salt, and sugar, things we use to prepare and season food but don't typically eat alone. Group 3 covers processed foods, relatively simple products made by combining groups 1 and 2. Canned vegetables, fresh bread, simple cheeses, and traditionally preserved foods fall here. Then there's Group 4, ultra-processed foods. These are industrial formulations, made mostly from substances derived from foods, combined with additives you wouldn't find in a home kitchen. Ultra-processed foods typically have 5 or more ingredients, including things like high-fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated oils, modified starches, flavor enhancers, and emulsifiers. Here's the key distinction. Ultra-processed foods aren't just foods with added salt or sugar. They're formulated products designed for convenience, long shelf life, and maximum palatability. These products often bear little resemblance to the whole foods they came from. The original plant material has been broken down and recombined with industrial additives into something entirely new. And this matters because ultra-processed foods now make up between 25 and 60% of daily calories in many Western countries. That's a significant portion of what we eat. The plant-based food industry has exploded over the past decade, driven by health concerns, environmental awareness, and ethical considerations about animal welfare. But many of these new plant-based products are ultra-processed. They carry health halos because they're vegan or plant-based, even when their ingredient lists tell a different story. Now let's look at the research. The NutriNet-Santé cohort study followed 63,835 adults in France for an average of 9 years, with some tracked for up to 15 years. Researchers carefully tracked what participants ate and categorized their food intake by both the source, animal versus plant, and the level of processing using the ANOVA system. The findings were striking. Participants who consumed nutrient-rich, minimally processed plant foods had a 44% lower risk of coronary heart disease. Those same participants also showed a 32% lower risk of cardiovascular disease overall. These are significant reductions linked to whole plant foods. But here's where it gets interesting. Ultra-processed plant-based foods told a completely different story, one the researchers didn't expect. Those who consumed more ultra-processed plant foods had a 46% higher incidence of coronary heart disease, Not lower, higher. They also showed a 38% higher incidence of cardiovascular disease overall. The plant-based label offered no protection when the food was ultra-processed. Let me put that in perspective. Adults eating high-quality, minimally processed plant foods had about 40% lower cardiovascular disease risk compared to those eating ultra-processed plant foods. The study authors emphasized that not all plant-based diets are equally beneficial. The level of processing and nutritional quality matter significantly for cardiovascular health. This wasn't the only study finding these patterns. Research from Imperial College London in 2024 connected plant-based ultra-processed foods specifically to cardiovascular risk. The Lancet Regional Health Europe published findings showing that when evaluating heart health, food ultra-processing overrides the apparent benefits of plant origin. In other words, a heavily processed plant-based product may not offer the heart benefits you'd expect, and might actually work against you. High-quality, minimally processed plant foods significantly reduce cardiovascular risk. But when those plant foods are ultra-processed, the advantage disappears, and can even backfire. So why does ultra-processing have this effect? The research points to several potential mechanisms that may explain the increased cardiovascular risk. First, ultra-processed foods often contain high levels of sodium, added sugars, and unhealthy fats, all linked to cardiovascular problems, even when the base ingredients are plants. Second, the industrial processing itself may create harmful compounds. High heat treatment and certain manufacturing processes can generate substances linked to inflammation. Third, ultra-processed foods often lack the fiber, vitamins, and phytonutrients found in whole plant foods. The processing strips away many of the compounds that make plants healthy. Fourth, the additives themselves may have effects we don't fully understand yet. Emulsifiers, for example, have been linked to gut inflammation in some preliminary research. And finally, ultra-processed foods are designed to be hyperpalatable, meaning they're easy to overeat. This can lead to excess calorie intake and weight gain, both cardiovascular risk factors. It's worth noting what this research doesn't say. It doesn't mean that all processed foods are harmful, or that you need to eat only raw vegetables straight from the garden. Basic processing, like cooking, fermenting, or freezing vegetables, can actually enhance nutritional value and food safety. Canned beans and frozen vegetables are still excellent choices. The issue isn't processing in general. It's the ultra-processing that transforms whole foods into industrial formulations bearing little resemblance to their plant origins. So how do you identify ultra-processed foods? Start by looking at the ingredient list. If it reads like a chemistry textbook, that's a red flag. Ultra-processed foods typically contain 5 or more ingredients, including substances you wouldn't use in home cooking. Things like maltodextrin, carrageenan, or sodium stearoyl lactylate. Ask yourself, could I make this at home with ingredients from my pantry? If the answer is no, you're likely looking at an ultra-processed product. Here's a practical approach. Base your plant-forward eating on actual plants. Make vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds the foundation of your meals. When you do buy packaged foods, choose products with short, recognizable ingredient lists. 5 ingredients or fewer, made from things your grandmother would recognize. Consider treating plant-based meat alternatives as occasional convenience foods, rather than dietary staples. A veggie burger now and then is fine. Just don't make it your primary protein source. Look for whole food alternatives to processed options. Instead of plant-based daily slices, try marinated and baked tofu or tempeh. Instead of vegan cheese, Try nutritional yeast or cashew-based sauces made at home. Cooking from scratch doesn't have to be complicated. Simple preparations like roasted vegetables, grain bowls, and bean soups count as minimally processed, and they can be made in large batches. Read beyond the marketing claims. Plant-based and vegan are not synonyms for healthy. These labels tell you what's not in the food, but nothing about how it was made. Remember that the whole foods plant-based approach remains one of the most evidence-backed dietary patterns for heart health. This research supports that. It just adds important nuance. The key message from this research is clear. It's not about avoiding plants. It's about choosing plants in their more natural forms whenever possible. Some nutrition experts have raised valid points about the limitations of this research. The NOVA classification system groups very different foods together under ultra-processed. Fortified plant milk and a vegan candy bar might both count as ultra-processed, even though their nutritional profiles are vastly different. The classification has its limits. There's also the question of accessibility. For some people, convenient plant-based alternatives serve as a stepping stone toward healthier eating patterns overall. The goal isn't to create anxiety around food choices. It's to give you information that helps you make more informed decisions based on your own priorities and circumstances. If you rely heavily on ultra-processed plant foods right now, consider making gradual changes. Swap 1 or 2 products per week for whole food alternatives and see how you feel. Try batch cooking on weekends to make whole food options just as convenient as packaged alternatives. A container of cooked lentils can be just as quick as opening a package. Focus on addition rather than restriction. Instead of thinking about what to avoid, think about what whole plant foods you can add to meals you already enjoy. And remember, perfection isn't the goal. Eating more whole plant foods more often is what matters, not eliminating every processed item from your diet entirely. The science here is evolving, and we'll likely learn more about which specific aspects of ultra-processing matter most. But the direction is clear. Whole foods win. This research aligns with what nutrition scientists have suspected for years. The food matrix matters. How nutrients are packaged in whole foods affects how our bodies use them. When you eat an apple, you get fiber, vitamins, and phytonutrients in a natural matrix that slows absorption and supports gut health. Apple-flavored processed snacks can't replicate that. The same principle applies to all plant foods. Chickpea in a homemade curry behaves differently in your body than the same chickpea broken down and reconstituted into a processed snack puff. Before making any significant changes to your diet, especially if you have existing heart conditions or other health concerns, please consult your doctor or a registered dietitian. Here's what we've learned today. Plant-based eating can be incredibly protective for your heart, but only when those plants remain close to their natural form. The 44% reduction in heart disease risk is real, but it comes from whole grains, legumes, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds, not from ultra-processed alternatives. So keep eating your plants. Just try to eat them in forms your great-grandmother would recognize. Your heart will thank you. This content is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Always consult your doctor before making changes to your health routine.